Hello everyone, and welcome to the Persons with Disabilities Self-Assessment webinar. We are Ask an Advocate, which is a website-based project created to help clients and service providers find information and resources about income assistance, disability, tenancy, and other income supports. In this webinar, we will go over how to complete the Persons with Disabilities application. Please remember that the information provided in this webinar will be applicable in British Columbia only, and throughout the webinar, we will refer to persons with disabilities as simply PWD. The PWD program is available through the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, and in this webinar, we will simply refer to them as the Ministry. For information on how to become eligible for PWD, visit our website by clicking the link in the description below. In this webinar, we will briefly discuss the PWD eligibility criteria, the definition of disability, the process, the PWD application booklet, the PWD self-assessment, and final tips for completing the application. This webinar will be useful for anyone looking to apply for PWD designation, advocates, medical professionals, social workers, or any other service provider assisting their client. To qualify for PWD, the following must be demonstrated. The individual meets financial eligibility and meets the PWD definition of disability. For more information about financial eligibility for PWD, please visit our website askanadvocate.ca or by clicking on the link in the description below. To meet the PWD definition of a disability, the applicant must meet all of the following criteria. You must be at least 18 years of age, must have severe mental and/or physical impairments. A doctor or nurse practitioner has confirmed that the impairment will likely continue for 2 or more years. The applicant is significantly restricted in performing daily living activities, and the applicant requires significant help to manage daily living activities from another person, animal, and/or device. When describing the applicant's disabilities throughout the booklet, it is important to remember and explain how often the applicant's daily living activities are affected. That is, to explain whether the restrictions are periodic or continuous. Periodic means that the applicant's symptoms come and go, but significant help is needed at times to perform daily living activities. Continuous means that the illness and required assistance is ongoing, whether it is daily, weekly, bi-weekly, or even monthly. The first step of the application process is to demonstrate that financial eligibility is met. If the applicant is already a client of the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, they can either call the ministry or go to any ministry office and request a PWD application. If the applicant is not already on ministry assistance, to get a PWD application, the applicant must first apply through the My Self-Serve online application. Please note that the PWD application is not available online, and one will be assigned to the applicant upon request. In this webinar, we will discuss the 24-page PWD booklet. If you are already receiving benefits from either Community Living BC, the Ministry of Children and Family Development at Home program, BC Pharmacare Plan P palliative care benefits, or Canada Pension Plan disability benefits, they will have to go through a simplified PWD application. For more information about the simplified application, please visit our website askanadvocate.ca. The PWD application, which is in the form of a booklet, has 3 sections. Section 1 is the applicant information and needs to be completed by the applicant. Section 2 is the medical report, and this needs to be completed by a doctor or a nurse practitioner. This section will provide information about the applicant's physical and/or mental impairments and how they affect the applicant's daily living activities. Section 3 is the assessor report, and this needs to be completed by a doctor, nurse practitioner, or a prescribed professional. This section will further explain the applicant's restrictions with daily living activities. The next slide lists those who are eligible to be an assessor. A prescribed professional can be a medical practitioner, a nurse practitioner, a registered psychologist, a registered nurse, a psychiatric nurse, an occupational therapist, a social worker, or a chiropractor. There are multiple steps to applying for the PWD designation. The first step of the application process is for the applicant to review all the questions on the PWD booklet and to complete the self-assessment if they wish to do so. The purpose of the self-assessment is to help the medical professionals understand your condition and restrictions with daily living activities. You may want to seek help from an advocate with the application. The second step is to have the applicant bring the PWD application and self-assessment to their doctor for them to fill out. It is important to know that the applicant does not need to pay the medical professionals to complete the booklet, as the medical services plan will pay them directly. The third step is to submit the PWD application to the Health Assistance Branch through the Ministry. There is a stamped envelope attached in the middle of the application with the Health Assistant Branch's address on it. The fourth and final step of the application process is to inform the doctor and the advocate, if you have one, of the Ministry's decision. This is important because in the event of a denial, you will need their assistance with the reconsideration process. Part A of Section 1 requires the applicant to complete their information such as their name, personal health number, phone number, and address. In this section, for the question that asks, "Do you need help completing this application?" the applicant can check off yes if they needed help from an advocate, family member, or friend, help with translation, writing if they cannot write on their own, reading if they are visually impaired, or more. This is the section where the applicant has the option to write about their disabling condition. It is important to remember that this section of the application is optional, and if applicants do not wish to complete it, they simply need to check off, "I chose not to complete this self-report," and this will not affect the decision. Part C of Section 1 is where the applicant would need to sign their booklet in front of a witness, who can be anyone. On the last page of the booklet, which is the Applicant Checklist, there is a list of questions to ensure that the applicant has completed the application correctly. The checklist also asks whether the applicant wishes to be notified when the Ministry's Health Assistance Branch has received the application. The applicant will have to check off the box corresponding to this question if they wish to be notified. It is helpful to check off this box to keep track of the application and to make sure that it isn't lost. The PWD Self-Assessment is a copy of the PWD application that may be used as a tool to communicate to the medical professional an applicant's perspective on their disability. The applicant can then give the self-assessment to their doctor or assessor, and it is used to communicate how they are restricted by their conditions and how much assistance is needed for their daily living activities. It acts as a guide for the doctor to understand the applicant's perspective. The self-assessment is helpful because it may decrease the time needed for the applicant's doctor or medical professional to complete the actual PWD application and to highlight all applicable information. The self-assessment can be filled out by the applicant or their advocate if they have one, to relay their condition and restrictions to the applicant's doctor. It is important to reiterate, however, that the information on the self-assessment is not a medical opinion, but simply the applicant's perspective of their condition. The self-assessment shown in this webinar is created by Ask an Advocate. If you would like to have a copy of the self-assessment, click the link in the description box to access a blank copy of the self-assessment. In the next few slides, we will go over the medical report section of the self-assessment. The medical report, which is section 2 of the application, is where the applicant and his or her doctor should explain the person's medical condition. The picture shown on the slide here is a copy of the self-assessment that matches the actual PWD application. The applicant's name should be written on top of the self-assessment. Part A, Section 2 requires the applicant to describe all conditions that the applicant has been diagnosed with, as well as the conditions that they believe they have but not yet been diagnosed with, such as depression or anxiety. If an applicant doesn't know what a specific condition is called, they may simply write the symptoms they are suffering from so that the doctor can then write the condition's name. Part B of Section 2 is the health history, which is where the applicant must write about the symptoms, duration, and severity of their conditions and how they impair the applicant. If an applicant suffers from severe depression, agitation, and lack of motivation, they may write this and explain how their depression makes them stay at home or not socialize with others. If the applicant also suffers from sleep disturbances, it will be helpful to write how many hours the applicant stays up when they do wake up in the middle of the night. If the applicant has a physical disability, it might be helpful to use a pain scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being low and 10 being high. It is also helpful to write how often the applicant experiences bad days. An example could be that the client experiences bad days 5 out of 7 days when they suffer severe panic attacks, anxiety, lack of motivation, and/or physical pain. For question 2, the applicant may want to disclose their current weight and height if they are relevant to the conditions they are suffering from. For question 3, the applicant should mention whether the medications and treatments they have been prescribed interfere with their daily living activities and also explain them. For example, if the applicant has been prescribed medications for their depression and the medication makes them drowsy, it would result in the applicant sleeping for extended hours. This may interfere with their daily living activities because not only does the applicant lack self-motivation, they also now don't have enough time to do certain daily living activities. For question 4, the applicant should mention whether they currently use prosthesis or aids for their impairments. Even if the applicant does not currently use them but believe they would benefit from using certain medical aids, it may be helpful to mention these as well. For example, if an applicant cannot walk well on their own and believes they would benefit from using a cane or walker, they should mention this in this section. It is important to remember that there must be consistency throughout the application. So for example, if the applicant mentions that they use a walker due to severe knee pain and imbalance from walking, but severe knee pain isn't mentioned in the first question, then it may be considered a deficiency. Part C of Section 2 asks about the degree and course of their impairment. That is, how long is their condition expected to last? One of the requirements for PWD is that an applicant's condition must be likely to continue for 2 or more years. Therefore, if the checkbox for this question is not checked off, it will be denied. Even if the applicant's doctor mentions that their impairment is permanent elsewhere in the application, but forgets to check off yes for this question, it may still be denied. Part D of Section 2 is where the applicant explains their functional skills or how they complete certain daily living activities. It is important for the applicant to describe these functional skills during their bad days. This part is also asking specifically without aid of another person, animal, or device. For example, how does the applicant climb stairs without the aid of a railing or help of a family member? It may be helpful to expand on each of the questions to further explain restrictions with their functional skills. For example, for the first question, if the applicant can walk less than 1 block unaided, they may want to explain that it is due to difficulties with all basic mobility, severe pain in the left leg, and that they need a walker to help them with their mobility. In cases where the disability is mostly about mental health and the applicant is physically capable of doing these activities but suffers from severe mental health, you can always write something along the lines of no physical limitation, but severe mental impairment, or severely lacks motivation. For question 5, the applicant may want to mention about their lack of desire to communicate if there is any difficulty in expressing themselves, whether other people have difficulty understanding them or whether they lose track of conversations due to cognitive impairment. Question 6 refers to deficits with cognitive and emotional function. The applicant should check off all skills that are affected due to cognitive and emotional impairment. They should also link the impairments to their conditions. So, for example, if an applicant suffers from extreme fatigue and severe depression, they may also be restricted with planning and judgment. Part E of Section 2 refers to daily living activities. The applicant must mention whether certain daily activities are restricted, and if they are, whether the restrictions are continuous or periodic. In the red box on the slide, you will see that if the applicant's doctor is also going to complete the assessor report of the PWD application, they do not need to complete this page. However, if the assessor is going to be someone else, then the applicant's medical practitioner must complete this page. In one column, you can see that it asks if the activity is restricted, and if it is, then the applicant would check off yes or no. If the applicant checks off yes, they also need to check off one of the following in the second column labeled continuous or periodic. If the applicant checks off periodic, they must explain how often in the box below underneath the table. As mentioned on the previous slide, if periodic is checked off, they should clearly explain how often they experience the symptoms. For example, severe acute pain due to IBS for months at a time, and during that time needs assistance 80% of that time. If any social functioning is impacted, it could be explained in the following question. For example, applicant socially isolates and is withdrawn or requires family and friends to motivate them to leave the house. It is important to provide comment regarding the degree of restriction. As example, moderate to severe or needs constant support. If the applicant requires assistance with daily living activities, it is important to explain what type of assistance. For Part F of Section 2, it is important for the applicant to explain their medical history and what may be related to the person's medical conditions. You may want to include the following: personal history of abuse, neglect, trauma, hospitalizations, surgeries, recovery, any self-harming behaviors, suicidal ideation, and more. In the next few slides, we will go over the Assessor report of the self-assessment. Part A of Section 3 refers to the applicant's current living conditions. If the applicant is currently living with a family member, friend, or a caregiver. For the comment section, they could write that they receive significant help from whomever they live with. Part B of Section 3 refers to the applicant's physical or mental impairment. For the first question, the applicant should briefly describe these impairments. Question 2 here refers to the applicant's ability to communicate. The applicant should explain whether each communication skill is good, satisfactory, poor, or they are unable to do them. For each of the skills, it may be helpful to explain them. For example, if the applicant cannot write, it may not be helpful to simply mention that it is due to lack of literary. The applicant could further explain that the lack of literacy is because of a learning disability. Question 3 of Part B refers to the applicant's mobility and physical impairments. For each of the skills mentioned, the applicant must indicate whether the daily living activities can be done independently, with periodic or continuous assistance, with the use of an assistive device, or whether it would take the applicant significantly longer to complete them. For each of the activities, it may be helpful to explain how they are restricted. That is, if an applicant says that it takes them significantly longer to walk outdoors, it may be helpful to write how much longer. Additionally, if an applicant requires assistance, it may be helpful to write who provides that assistance. For this section, it is important to remember that one of the eligibility criteria is that the applicant needs significant help with daily living activities from another person, animal, or device. The applicant can also write that even though the applicant is independent, they struggle to ask for help when they need it, and that they would benefit from assistance. Question 4 of Part B is only applicable to applicants who have a mental impairment or brain injury, as this section is related to cognitive and emotional functioning. The applicant must indicate whether the functions mentioned are impacted or not, and whether the impact is minimal, moderate, or major. It may be helpful to explain in the comment section how these functions are impacted. For example, if an applicant checks off that there is a major impact to their motivation, it may be helpful to write that this is due to extreme fatigue, severe depression, and lack of sleep. It is important to remember that the answers for this question must be consistent with functional skills in Section 2D of the application. Part C of Section 3 refers to impairments with more daily living activities. Once again, the applicant must explain whether they can do the activities independently, with periodic or continuous assistance, with the help of an assistive device, or the applicant would take significantly longer. If the applicant chooses independent for a daily living activity, the ministry will assume that the applicant is not restricted. Therefore, it is important for the applicant to complete this section while thinking of their bad days when the applicant is significantly restricted, so they can describe their impairment better on the application. It is also helpful to link explanations to the applicant's disability. So for example, unable to stand and lift due to back pain. For the social functioning of this question, it is applicable to applicants who are suffering identified mental impairment or brain injury. Based on our experience, applicants who are suffering from physical disabilities should consider completing this section as well. For example, someone suffering from physical pain may be making inappropriate social decisions or interacting with others in an irritable way. The applicant may want to write about their inability to ask for help, deal with unexpected stressful situations, develop and maintain relationships, interactions with others, and their ability to make appropriate social decisions. The last 3 questions in this section refer to how the applicant socializes with those close to him or her, such as a partner, family member, friends, or those in the community such as neighbors, storekeepers, or public officials. An example could be the applicant does not communicate with neighbors due to severe anxiety. Additionally, if the applicant requires assistance with social skills, they may want to write it here too. Part D of Section 3 asks whether the applicant requires assistance from other people, assistive devices, and/or assistance animals. The applicant should check off all devices that they are using for their impairments. If they cannot afford to buy the needed aid, but they believe they would benefit from using certain medical aids, it may be helpful to mention these as well. For example, if an applicant cannot walk well on their own and believes that they would benefit from using a cane or walker, they should mention so on this page. It is important that the information provided in this section is consistent with the health history, which is Section 2B of the application. Once the application has been completed, it should be put in the envelope that is stapled in the middle of the booklet and mailed to the address written on it. It may take 1 to 4 months to receive a decision from the Ministry's Health Assistance Branch, and this decision will be delivered to you by mail. It is important to remember that the eligibility for PWD begins the month after the month of approval. For example, if the date of approval is August 25th, PWD benefits will begin on September 1st. Thank you for watching, everyone. Feel free to browse through other webinars and provide us feedback by clicking on the survey link in the description below.